Hello and welcome back to Indus News with me, Usman Lone. Now, we start this hour with our top story, and that's Brexit, as British Prime Minister Boris Johnson loses his working parliamentary majority ahead of a crucial Brexit vote. MP Philip Lee has joined the Liberal Democrats after defecting from the Conservative Party. In a statement, the Liberal Democrats announced that Tory lawmaker Philip Lee has joined the party. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Boris Johnson has urged Parliament to give the government flexibility to get a Brexit deal done. In his address to Parliament, he said voting against the government will make Brexit harder. Johnson said a delay in Brexit will undermine the progress that has already been made. Now, the EU has denied the UK's claim that Brussels is thinking over a revised Brexit deal proposed by Prime Minister Boris Johnson's government. The European Commission says the deal agreed by former Prime Minister Theresa May is still the best solution for an orderly Brexit. An EU Commission spokeswoman today says a no-deal Brexit is a very likely scenario. She contradicted the UK's claim that it shared an alternative to the Irish backstop with Brussels. Earlier, the British government said it received a positive EU response to its revised Brexit plan. Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab said the two sides were thrashing through the details of an amended deal. Meanwhile, the opposition Labour Party says it wants fresh elections, but only if a no-deal Brexit is blocked first. Now, US Vice President Mike Pence has called upon the EU to negotiate with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson in good faith. Addressing a joint presser with Ireland's Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, Pence said the Brexit deal should respect British sovereignty. He said Washington will play any role it can to achieve a successful Brexit. He also mentioned challenges on the Northern Irish border. The Irish president says his government stands behind the agreement the EU has struck with Britain. Varadkar said that a hard border will undermine peace on the island. Now, as the Kashmir crisis continues, Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan and Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman have discussed the situation in Indian-occupied Kashmir. This was the third phone call over the crisis between Khan and the Saudi Crown Prince in the last 3 weeks. Khan told Mohammed bin Salman about the worsening crisis in the occupied valley, which has been under a lockdown for the past 30 days. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia's Foreign Minister Adil Al-Jubeir is expected to visit Pakistan tomorrow to discuss the situation in Kashmir. As Indian-occupied Kashmir continues to reel under the siege, British lawmakers voiced their concern over the matter. In Parliament's first session after a 5-week break, lawmakers called the situation in the occupied valley a humanitarian crisis. More in this report.
Kashmiris have been living in a communication blackout ever since India stripped the region of its autonomy and later imposed a curfew, promoting anger from across the world. British Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab says India's revocation of the valley's special status is not just a bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. The Foreign Secretary was answering questions raised by the British MPs on the worsening situation in the occupied valley.
It is a bilateral issue for India and Pakistan, but it is also an international issue given the human rights at stake.
Raab said human rights violation in Kashmir should be investigated.
There has been a discussion about it within the UN Security Council, and the point I would make is that all and any allegations of human rights violations are deeply concerning. They must be investigated thoroughly, promptly and transparently.
Lawmakers said 4,000 Kashmiris have been detained by the Indian occupation forces in the last 30 days. They said the international community must play its part to stop human rights violation in the valley.
And staying with Kashmir, Iran has also expressed concern over the deteriorating humanitarian situation there. Speaking to Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi, Iran's Foreign Minister Javad Zarif reaffirmed Tehran's support for the Kashmiri people. In a phone call, Qureshi informed Zarif about the situation in occupied Kashmir. He briefed Zarif on India's revocation of the occupied Kashmir's special status. Foreign Minister Qureshi also called up his Bangladeshi counterpart, Dr. Abdul Momin, and highlighted the humanitarian crisis there. Qureshi says steps taken by the Indian government in occupied Kashmir pose a great risk to peace and security in the region. Now, as India's crushing curfew and communications blackout has entered its 30th day, the clampdown has suspended all activity in the valley and it's cut off people from the rest of the world. More in this report.
In the disputed region, which is currently under lockdown by the Indian government, simple communication is a major struggle. Kashmir has been under a communications blackout for 28 days since the government revoked its special status. As a result, millions of Kashmiris have been left with no access to the outside world. No internet, no cell phones, no landlines. Even post offices are not fully functional, with just a few letters leaving the region and little to none distributed within Kashmir itself. This local television channel is relaying messages from Kashmiris living outside the region in the hope their families will see them. Even marriage has been affected. Every day, local newspapers carry adverts announcing the cancellation of weddings. As a result of the crackdown, news from Kashmir is at a premium. The region's journalists face a challenge to file even basic reports. India's Supreme Court has ordered the government to respond to a legal challenge calling for an end to the blackout to allow for media reporting. Until then, the only reliable way to get back in touch with the world is to fly out of Kashmir.
Iran says it will hold joint military exercises with Russia in the Indian Ocean, but Foreign Minister Javad Zarif did not say when the drills will be held. During his visit to Russia, Zarif said several other countries may join the exercises. Iran's Foreign Minister said these exercises are not aimed at third countries, but to maintain regional security. He said Tehran and Moscow have a similar vision on security in the Persian Gulf. Zarif said the Tehran-Moscow security plan is based on cooperation, where the American idea of security is on aggression and hostility. Hezbollah chief Hassan Nasrallah has threatened Israel with missile strikes following recent clashes on the border with Lebanon. He says Hezbollah will attack targets along the border and deep inside Israel if it launched more cross-border attacks. In a televised speech, Mr. Nasrallah said the flare-up launched a new phase in which Hezbollah no longer has red lines. He said Hezbollah fighters in southern Lebanon would focus on intruding Israeli drones. In Afghanistan, 16 civilians have been killed and over 100 others injured in a blast near the Green Village complex in Kabul. The Taliban claims responsibility, saying they were targeting foreign forces. The Interior Ministry says the blast was caused by a tractor packed with explosives parked behind one of the complex's walls. The Taliban say the attack was coordinated because it was followed by fighters entering the complex to fight Afghanistani forces. Spain's acting Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has rejected the formation of a coalition government with the far-left Podemos party. Unidas Podemos leader Pablo Iglesias Churion says the coalition government is the only option to go forward. Spain's socialist leader Pedro Sanchez says there are too many disagreements with Podemos to have a coalition government. In a hard-hitting speech, Mr. Sanchez said a coalition government would not work because of disagreements in matters of state. The Socialists won April's election but failed to win enough seats to govern without the support of other parties. If no agreement is reached by September 23rd, then another election will be held on November the 10th. Now in South Africa, hundreds of anti-migrant protesters have marched through the streets of the country's commercial capital, Johannesburg. The locals are blaming immigrants for high unemployment. An angry mob burned and looted shops overnight. Police arrested 20 people for attacking foreign trucks near the coastal city of Durban. They fired rubber bullets to disperse the crowds. South Africa is a major destination for economic migrants from Lesotho, Mozambique and Zimbabwe. In Ukraine, the parliament has overwhelmingly approved a bill to scrap immunity from prosecution for lawmakers. Previously, lawmakers could be arrested only with parliament's approval. The move was promised by President Volodymyr Zelensky during his election campaign in April. Lawmakers who voted against the motion say it can pave the way for political persecution. In China, 8 primary school children have been stabbed to death in a knife attack in central Hubei province. Police have arrested a 40-year-old male at the crime scene. Police say 2 of the survivors are being treated for life-threatening injuries. The attack took place on the first day of school in the Chaoyangpao village of Hubei. China's state media says the authorities have not yet shared the motive for the attack. It says the suspect is an ex-convict who was released in May after serving an 8-year sentence. Well, 25 bodies have been recovered after a scuba diving vessel sank after catching fire off an island in Southern California. The U.S. Coast Guard says a search operation is underway to look for the 9 other missing passengers. The 75-foot commercial diving boat erupted in flames near the shoreline of Santa Cruz Island. Santa Barbara County Sheriff Bill Brown said 39 people were on board when the fire broke out. 5 of the diving boat's crew escaped the blaze. Authorities say the cause of the fire is unknown so far.
We understand the tremendous burden that they are under right now as they wait to determine exactly what happened and what condition and situation their loved ones are in. We will be working diligently to try to get them as much information as possible as soon as possible.
In Mexico, 5 people have been killed after gunmen attacked a bus station in the city of Cuernavaca. Morelos state authorities say the shooting was targeted and part of a turf war between rival drug cartels. Officials say the gunmen killed 3 passengers on the bus, 1 in the waiting area and another in a bathroom. Authorities say Morelos is the epicenter of a turf war between at least 5 groups. Over 250,000 people have been killed in drug wars since 2006. Mexico's army has been fighting the cartels for 13 years. Hurricane Durian has battered parts of Florida's coast. The slow-moving hurricane killed at least 5 people in the Abaca Islands in the northern Bahamas. 9 counties in Florida have ordered mandatory evacuations. Authorities also ordered over 1 million people to evacuate in nearby states on the U.S. East Coast. The National Hurricane Center says Durian has weakened to a Category 3 storm with wind speeds of over 190 kilometers per hour. Georgia, as well as North and South Carolina, have declared a state of emergency. Now, over 100 migrants have disembarked in Sicily after Italian police seized a German rescue ship. The vessel's captain, Klaus-Peter Reiss, says Mediterranean storms forced him to seek shelter in the port of Pozzallo. The vessel Eleanor waited 8 days to be granted safe harbor by Italian authorities. The Italian Coast Guard allowed 31 remaining migrants aboard the ship to use another rescue ship to land on the island of Lampedusa. In the meantime, the Spanish Coast Guard rescued 200 North African migrants attempting a dangerous crossing. The Libyan Navy also picked up more than 100 migrants off the country's west coast. Now, Brazil has reached out to Norway and Germany for help in putting out thousands of wildfires in the Amazon rainforest. The 2 European states discontinued financial aid to Brazil over deforestation last month. The move did not go down well with President Jair Bolsonaro, but Environment Minister Ricardo Salles says talks on the resumption of aid are progressing. The Bolsonaro administration earlier admitted it does not have the resources to put out the fires. Indigenous tribes living deep within the Amazon are facing a crisis. The choking smoke is also causing breathing disorders among the Amazon's population, including children. There's also wildfires in Bolivia as people continue to struggle to contain them, and they've decimated at least 1 million hectares of forest land. The flames leave a terrible landscape in their wake, strewn with burnt trees and the bodies of animals who perished in the blaze. More in this report.
The Chiquita dry forest's flora and fauna have suffered tremendous losses in the Bolivian wildfires. What's left behind seems like a vision of the apocalypse. One can also see the bodies of dead peccaries, rabbits and snakes in the blackened earth.
The fire is very harmful for local ecosystems because the animals which are dying here are all endangered. At this rate, soon these animals will be lost forever. For example, only one jaguar has been rescued from the area since the fire started.
2,000 firefighters and the military are working together to contain the blaze, but a significant amount of damage has already been done.
Firefighters are being deployed daily to the area affected by the fires. An intensive search is in place to try and locate animals that need help and to transport them to the center.
Environmentalists and locals blame Bolivian President Evo Morales for the disaster. They accuse him of passing legislation that encourages slash and burn farming. The Morales government says it is dry weather and strong winds that are to blame.
Now, the Norwegian group of islands called Svalbard is one of the most northernmost inhabited areas in the world. People living there have a front row seat to changes in the Arctic being caused by global warming. A report by the Norwegian Centre for Climate Services warns the area's temperature could rise up to 10 degrees Celsius by the year 2100. More in this report.
Kim Holmen, the national director of the Norwegian Polar Institute, has lived at Svalbard for 30 years. He describes the changes he has seen as profound, large and rapid.
We are losing the Svalbard we know. We are losing the Arctic as we know it because of climate change. This is a forewarning of all the hardship and problems that will spread around the planet. It is important to stop it as quickly and as soon as possible.
Average temperatures in Svalbard have risen by 4 degrees Celsius over the last 50 years. Arctic sea ice is declining by an average of 12% every 10 years since 1979. This has had severe consequences for the people of the world's northernmost town, Longyearbyen.
As the permafrost thaws, things that are in the ground tend to be pulled up. That's happening more or less all the time. So we might see that the graves literally come up, the coffins.
Climate change is also raising the risk of avalanches in Longyearbyen. The Norwegian Centre for Climate Services warns things will only get worse over the rest of the century.
Now, Bangladesh has suspended mobile phone services for over 1 million Rohingyas living in refugee camps in Cox's Bazar. The move follows the killing of a 4th Rohingya accused of murdering a ruling party politician just last month. Bangladesh's telecommunication authority says mobile operators have been given a week to implement the ban. Rohingya leaders say the mobile services ban will disrupt communications between refugee camps. Now, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia laid down their arms in 2016, but its former members are still far from leading normal civilian lives. More in this report.
The 5-decade-long conflict, which claimed the lives of almost 300,000 people, came to an end when the rebels signed a peace deal. That deal was signed in 2016 with former President Juan Manuel Santos. The guerrillas agreed to disarm in return for promises of reintegration into society, economic benefits, and political representation in Congress. But many still fear for their lives and are concerned the present government isn't doing enough for their reintegration into society.
La preocupación más grande es
the greatest concern is for life, to guarantee lives because they're killing people not just in reintegration process but also hundreds of social activists. People fighting for their rights, fighting for their reidentifications, and that is why they're seen as targets. In second place, the implementation of the peace agreement that needs to have a guarantee to life.
Y en segundo lugar,
Current President Ivan Duque has opposed many aspects of the peace deal and unsuccessfully tried to make amendments via Congress. He has asked for tougher punishments for ex-rebels who committed war crimes. Some 14,000 ex-guerrillas are in the reincorporation process, with a quarter living in 24 reintegration camps. The UN says 137 ex-combatants have been killed since the deal was signed, leaving many afraid for their lives outside the camps. UN figures show just 10% of ex-guerrillas have been granted credit for farming and development projects.
One starts to lose faith in the credibility of the peace process from the state. I have faith in the decisions that were taken at the beginning, the fight for peace, to find a way to build a stable and durable peace.
A dissident movement is another growing concern. A group of former rebels announced a new offensive in late August as a reaction to failures in the peace process. The government says it will extend a monthly $200 stipend to ex-combatants until December 31st. But this could be too little, too late.
The United Nations has condemned rising violence across Nigeria and the lack of accountability for perpetrators. The UN Special Rapporteur Agnes Kalamard says Nigeria needs to take urgent action to end the violence. Presenting her findings in Abuja, Kalamard said Nigeria is a pressure cooker of internal conflict. She said the country requires change in its judiciary, police and military for people to stop resorting to violence. Kalamard said Nigeria's failure to address the situation could destabilize other West African countries. Nigeria is currently facing multiple conflicts, including tribal wars and attacks by the terrorist group Boko Haram. Now, animals living in a South Korean zoo are being treated to special fruit dishes to celebrate the upcoming Thanksgiving holidays. Chuseok is a 3-day holiday celebrated in South Korea, and now it's being celebrated by animals too. Find out in this report.
Chuseok, aka the Korean Thanksgiving Day, is among the most important festive holidays of the year. To celebrate, zookeepers at the Everland Amusement Park in Yongin are preparing traditional Korean plates.
Because the panda is eating that delicious fruit, I want to eat that fruit on Thanksgiving Day too.
Koreans observe the traditional harvest festival called Chuseok by visiting their ancestral hometowns and sharing traditional food. Everland is no different. These traditional plates called gyujolpan are served with fruits like bananas, apples and tomatoes for red pandas, ring-tailed lemurs and elephants.
In celebration of Thanksgiving, we prepared this to spend some fun time with the animals living in the zoo. We've prepared more special ways to feed the animals, such as gujolpan and bananas in the hay.
Korea isn't the only country to celebrate the harvest season with festivities. China, the United States and Argentina celebrate their holidays during different times of the year. For Koreans, the annual holiday, which has been marked on August the 15th of the lunar calendar, will fall on September the 13th this year.
Cabo Delgado in the north of Mozambique is one of the country's poorest regions. But it's also the site of a little-known insurgency that's been sowing terror for close to 2 years. More in this report.
Burnt-out houses, food supplies reduced to ash, and villagers left hungry and fearing for their lives. For nearly 2 years now, the residents of the North Mozambican province of Cabo Delgado have been living in fear of attacks.
They came out of nowhere and burnt my house. Now we live with nothing. We have nothing left. We live like this now.
The attacks are unclaimed, and those who carry them out remain largely unidentified.
I don't know who they were. It was night, but I can tell you that there were a lot of them. There were young people, and women too.
Over 300 people have died in these attacks since October 2017. Many of the survivors have since fled, like Ayuba and his family, to seek refuge with relatives who live elsewhere. 6 people live in this hut, a family wrenched away from the fields that normally provide their livelihood.
I urge the government to do all it can to put a stop to this war, so that we can get back to a normal life.
Local authorities say they are concerned by the situation and are doing all they can to secure the region. But for the Bishop of Pemba, that is not enough. He recently published a letter criticising the government for its lack of action and communication.
Say who they are, show them, and act to stop the attacks. This is our request, that the authorities go deep because the poor are dying.
The Islamic State group claimed 2 of the attacks that have taken place in 2019, but police and security experts doubt the veracity of these claims.
Now, Glasgow, which is Scotland's biggest city, is at the epicentre of a substance abuse crisis. According to the National Records of Scotland's office, it saw an unprecedented 1,187 drug-related deaths last year across the nation of 5.4 million people. Figures for England and Wales released last month by Britain's Office of National Statistics show drug deaths there have also reached record levels. More in this report.
They're just the most visible example of a worsening drug crisis in Glasgow and across Scotland, which now has one of the highest rates of drug-related deaths in Europe. Many drug users in Glasgow, like those in this rehabilitation centre, have been using for decades. Long-term addicts' age and years of abuse are contributing to the rocketing rate of drug deaths, with 42, the average age of such victims last year. The local government is forming a task force and opening a new drug treatment centre. But local activists say that their response hasn't really evolved in almost 30 years. Anne-Marie, herself a former addict, says it will take a drastic approach to tackle such an endemic problem.
I think the normalisation of addiction passing as culture in Scotland has a lot to do with the state we see ourselves in now.
Official statistics for last year show a record 1,187 fatalities in Scotland, with many predicting that this year's figures will be even higher.
Now, the latest tourist destination in Spain is a cave. But what sets this one apart is that it simulates an underground Martian colony. For a Martian experience that's out of this Earth, watch this report.
Scientists say if humans are ever to colonize Mars, they'll have to live underground to survive its hostile terrain. But what would such a life be like? You can find out if you visit Astroland's Ares station in Spain's Cantabrian Mountains, where scientists and architects have turned a cave into a Martian colony simulator.
An adventure, honestly, something totally different from what you find outside in your day-to-day, an experience that totally takes you out of your comfort zone. It is another world. You have to adapt, change your mindset, and everything that is ordinary, you have to learn how to do it differently from what you used to do on Earth.
The Ares station isn't something anyone can just jump into. Participants undergo 26 days of online courses, followed by 3 days of intense training before they are allowed to enter the cave. A maximum of 10 people can participate in each mission, which lasts 4 days.
I feel absolutely great. It was a super great experience to be on Mars for 4 days. We were in a cave now, and then we always had those great moments every day where you went on an EVA. It's called an extravehicular activity, where you go out of the habitat where we were sleeping in, and then you were going out in the cave, and it just looked like Mars.
Astroland's Ares station has had one successful mission already. Each participant had to pay the astronomical price of $6,600. But you may not have to wait long if you want to experience actual space travel. This June, NASA announced it would be opening the International Space Station to tourists in 2020.
Now to the world of business, and European stock markets are trading lower over Brexit uncertainty. Investors are cautious after the latest escalation in the trade war between the US and China also. The British pound has fallen to its lowest level against the dollar since January 2017. Fears of a snap election in Britain did not spare the euro either. It slid to a 28-month low against the dollar on expectations of further interest rate cuts in the eurozone. Well, it's 31 degrees here in Lahore, but let's take a look at the weather around the world. Well, that's all from me and the team here in Lahore, but I'll be back at the top of the hour with the headlines. Bye-bye.